So businessman Kenny Kunene has launched Africa News Global with the promise of providing an alternative to mainstream media, he says. In fact, Kunene says that the mainstream media has allowed itself to be captured by factions within the ANC. He's promised not to hamper the editorial independence of this outfit. Africa News Global co-owner Kenny Kunene joining us now via our video link for more on his thoughts and ambitions. Kenny, thanks very much for making time. It's great to see you. So this is actually a relaunch, if we're being more precise. I mean, this site outfit was attempted 5 years ago. What didn't work back then?
Thank you very much, Ayanda, for having me, and good morning to your viewers. Everything worked very well. Africa News 24/7 ran for 5 years, and we just had a different vision, informed by the global partnerships that we have, and we decided to relaunch as we're also introducing new technical features on the site.
All right. The elephant in the room, of course, is that you're a political player in South Africa's democratic ecosystem, so to speak. You had promised that viewers, or rather readers, will get truthful and objective content. How are you giving an assurance of that, though, when you are so intricately involved in the formation of this platform and are so intricately linked to a political party?
I've always separated business with politics, to politics. Africa News 24 has been there, and I have been involved in the politics of Patriotic Alliance. And it has not been one-sided and reporting only on Patriotic Alliance. So there is that separation of business. I don't run Africa News 24/7. There is an editorial team that runs it. So there is no way that with the relaunch anything will change. It has been happening already. I have not interfered in editorial. So all that we did was to relaunch, but it's a continuation of what has been happening.
You don't necessarily run it, but you co-own it. Don't you think that's equally as important?
Yeah, it is, of course, a reality. But I'm a businessman, first of all, before I'm a politician. And I'm in business so that I can survive. I'm in politics so that I can change the lives of our people. And as I said, there is a separation from my side. That is why with the launch, you saw political leaders from different political parties being invited, because that was a business launch. It was not politics. The launch itself must give you confidence that when it comes to business, we forget about our political roles, but we focus on the business.
Several senior government officials, my understanding, were at that launch. I mean, you've just mentioned to us that it was after an invite. In what capacity were they there, and what's going to be their level of involvement in this project?
You see, this is a very serious problem, where when cabinet ministers or political leaders, political party leaders, are invited to events like this by a media house like us, then it is questioned. I think Zizi Godwa captured it very well, because he spoke at the launch, the deputy minister responsible for intelligence in the presidency. He said, and I quote him, "We are so accustomed to one voice that when there's a different voice, it must be wrong, it must be criticized, it must be attacked." But he went further to say, "I would never imagine myself in the same room with the president of ATM, President Zungula, except in parliament. Because when media houses invite politicians to their functions, they focus on those who are aligned to their narrative." And he said, "But here, we come from different political parties, different political views, and we must appreciate that." So it was an invitation to political leaders, because obviously news publications write about politicians, they write about political parties. There were also business people that were invited because we also write about business people. There were also celebrities that were invited because we write about celebrities. So I don't know what is really the fuss about cabinet ministers being at our launch. Maybe it was not expected. And by the way, the president of the country as the leader of the ANC was also invited. And had it been not for the G20 summit, where he had to leave on the same day of the launch, he would have been at the launch also. Other political party leaders did not make it, but they were invited.
All right. Several things that you've mentioned there. One, you say that the Deputy Minister, Zizi Kota, mentioned that there's one voice in the country. I know of a lot of people who will push back against that. In fact, there is a fair amount of diversity, if you like. Perhaps it's a diversity where not everybody feels represented, but the notion that there's a single narrative perhaps is one that's going to need a bit more backing than just unsubstantiated claims. But the second thing is, I'm sure you must admit, the optics of having especially senior government officials even being seen to be associated with a news organization will leave a lot to be desired. For one, credibility is your currency as a news agency, and you don't want at any instance for that to be questioned. Wouldn't you agree?
I think when Newzroom was launched, politicians were invited. I remember seeing some of the media houses hosting events and inviting politicians. Politicians are human beings before they are politicians. And politicians, some of the politicians become acquaintances or friends or comrades before you are in business and before they are in politics.
So these senior government officials, sorry to interrupt you, were they just as friends? Is that essentially the message?
No. We invited different political leaders and we invited different cabinet ministers. What is wrong with that?
With what objective were they there?
They get invited by business people, they get invited by media houses. Perhaps the gripe here is that they came to a launch of a media house that is owned by Kenny Kunene, and that is why their attendance is being questioned so much, and which is very much unfair. I think they are adults, they would have applied their minds.
So they were not there as...
invite one political party, I invited different political parties.
Help us connect the dots, Kenny. Apologies for interrupting you there. We're just running out of time. Help us connect the dots. They're not there necessarily as friends, as you would say. They were there nonetheless. And that's why I'm asking you, in what capacity were they there? To what end did they attend this function? Let's not necessarily run on perceptions. Let's hear it from you about why they were there and why perhaps you had invited them.
In what capacity? When you do an event, you invite people who are part of the society. They are part of the society. So they had nothing, there's no impact, there is nothing, they were invited, and all of them, actually, who were there, decided that they want to give messages of support. What is wrong with that?
All right.
There's nothing wrong with it.
You also being an important player on the political landscape is something we've already touched on. You were mentioning that 5 years ago when this platform was launched, there was a clear distinction between the work you do as a businessman and a politician, and there will be no editorial interference. How does the public keep tabs of that? In other words, how can people from the outside be able to see the separation taking place in the inside? It's a question of transparency.
It has happened for 5 years. So they have been doing it. They have seen it. There's never been a story that has interfered in editorial. So it has happened for 5 years. So it is not a new thing. Let us not talk about it as if it's a new thing. I've done it before. It is just a continuation of doing it. And as I said, we have a different vision for the media house. We've done partnerships with other global publications. We've done a partnership with BRICS Television. And I think in the light of these partnerships, one would want to remain as ethical as possible. But accept these partnerships. That's what I have done for the past 5 years.
Are you able to run us through at least some of the partnerships that you have managed to clinch this time around?
I've just mentioned BRICS Television. I am not at liberty to mention others as part of our agreement. But as time goes on, we will then indicate who they are.
Are you able to get us an idea of what it is about this agreement that prevents you from speaking up about these partnerships?
It's about editorial exchange and publication of stories, exclusive stories. So it is all about news and also exchanging of viewers, of readers, so that you would appreciate that we now also have a YouTube channel, which is ANG Television. So we'll also be exchanging content and also giving each other access to our followers.
Of course, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, a part of our currency in news is credibility, and there are certain mechanisms that can be enhanced. Is this platform planning to register with the Press Council?
To register with the Press Council?
Yes.
No. That is not the intention right now. We have not discussed that, but since we started 5 years ago, we took a decision that we're not going to register with the Press Council, as we feel that it is not properly constituted, and I think that we need a media tribunal that is properly constituted, so that we can be able to hold people accountable. I'll make an example why. You've got Hogarth in the Sunday Times, where faceless people write and abuse people of South Africa. They get personal with them, they insult them, they abuse them verbally, and yet there's no face, there's no name to take responsibility. You've got Shwashi. And the Press Council has not taken them to task. So satire cannot be used to insult mothers and fathers of children in this country. So we don't want to be part of something that is not for the interests and protecting the dignity and the human rights of our people. So no, we are not part of the Press Council.
All right. I guess people will read into that what they will. Another sort of reaction, if you like, that I've seen are individuals who've accused the platform of essentially plagiarizing in some respects. I'll be upfront, I haven't necessarily seen references of articles yet, but there is a discussion that I've come across where there's a perception that in some instances, not everything on this platform is original content. What's your response to that?
The person who started this narrative, Chris Rope, is a former Mail and Guardian journalist, a white supremacist. So I understand that he would have a problem with the black-owned media house that is saying that he's having a different voice. He thinks that he is the god of journalism in this country, and he is nothing but a journalist. The fact that he sits on different councils says nothing. He worked for News 24, he worked for the Mail and Guardian, so I don't really want to entertain him. He can write what he wants on Twitter. We have assembled a team of young people that we are giving an opportunity so that they can be able to cast their own narrative in this country, so that they can come with new ideas on how to do things, and where there are mistakes, obviously the editor will deal with that and he will guide them. But we are on the right track. For the past 5 years, we have been doing that. I don't know why is it coming now. There are international stories that all news publications would take and credit those international publications where they have taken the stories. So Chris Rowe is just a bitter white supremacist. I have no time for him.
All right. You mentioned there are some mistakes that could have happened. Could maybe some of those mistakes being some of the young reporters essentially lifting copy from other platforms? But I do have to take a quick breather, Kenny. With your indulgence, please, if you can just continue this conversation on the other side of this. We'll also try to bring in William Bird for a sense of what he makes of where we are. With your indulgence, Kenny, please do stay on the line. William Bird will come to you in just a short moment. You're watching the AM Report, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're live on the AM Report. It's great to be with you. I'm Ayanda Nyati. So we'll continue with our discussion with Kenny Kunene. He's now the co-owner of Africa News Global. Joining us for that discussion as well is also William Bird. You know, he's with Media Monitoring Africa. He's the director there. And William, we're bringing you on the back of remarks actually that were made by the Tourism Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, who mentioned that media freedom in South Africa, in some respects, is actually the preserve of those who have resources. Does she have a point?
Hi, good morning. Well, I guess to the extent that you need the kind of resources to set up your own kind of your own newsroom and do that, you know. But I mean, we've got hundreds of community radio stations, hundreds of small commercial independent media, whether they print or online entities. So, you know, of course you do need resources. I guess the biggest limitation currently in South Africa is access to the internet and access to data. I know that she quoted that in her speech. So even though we do have just over 50% of our population, or 55% I think was the figure in her speech, having access, it's still an incredibly expensive means. And we know that broadcast is now the most, you know, well, it remains one of the most accessible. So the SABC continues to have the biggest kind of footprint and draw the biggest daily audiences as the public broadcaster. So I'm not sure to what, you know, what the implication is of that kind of comment. Is it suggesting that it leans in a particular way? I'm not exactly sure. But of course you do need resources, but we're seeing increasingly one of the advantages of being able to be on the internet and digital is that it means you can set up a newsroom with very little cost. You can set up a website at minimal cost and you can get going. Where it becomes a very expensive and resource-intensive exercise is with something like Newzroom Afrika. I mean, a brand new station, relatively speaking, that's not a trivial exercise to set up something like yours that, you know, puts out news on an ongoing, continued basis.
Absolutely. I guess on the back of that, how should we respond to the relaunching, if you like, of the African News Global? I mean, Kenny Kunene is still on the line to us. I'd asked several questions around even just the optics of having cabinet ministers arrive at the launch of a platform like that in a context like ours, right? Charged exchanges, perceptions flying around. How did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, you can't avoid that, and I guess that the challenge for them is, well, firstly, you know, I think that we should welcome anyone that wants to start up a new news organization in this particular environment, and if they're going to put forward a different view, then that's great. I think that you need diversity of views, voices, and opinions, whether we agree with them or otherwise. You know, it's why Newzroom Afrika has been such a fantastic addition to our news diet, I think, broadly speaking. When you then have very particular politicians appearing from very select kind of groupings and factions, of course, from within, for example, the ruling party, it does put forward a particular kind of angle on the kind of launch. I think more tellingly, though, is the decision by Africa News Global not to join the press council. I think that is a deeply worrying issue, and I think it's a big mistake on their part, you know, precisely because, as I heard you say at the start of your interview, I think before I could hear Mr. Kunene, one of the things that you're talking about is your credibility, and, you know, the overwhelming majority of news organizations either belong to the BCCSA, but they're not broadcasters, so they can't join that, but they should and could be joining the press council, because it says these are the principles of accepted journalism that we adhere to, you know. So I think that is something that's going to harm their credibility. Add to that the issue that we know that they have been plagiarizing stories from other news entities. I went and looked after I saw some of the comments on Twitter. I went and looked for myself, and indeed it's clear that several of their stories have been lifted without attribution and just replaced and put up on their site. There was one about Elon Musk as a direct example that was copied almost exactly word for word from the BBC, and that's not a good look for the start of for a start of something that we would hope is putting forward, a new African agenda.
Yeah, Kenny Kunene, are you still with us? Your response to that?
Hello.
Are you able to hear us, Kenny? I'm hoping you were able to also catch some of the remarks that William Burdish just made. I guess it comes down to also, if you're not going to be part of the press council, in what ways does accountability take place within the organization? Because I'm sure you'll agree that that task essentially can't wholly be an inside job, for lack of a better term. That's got bad connotations. But there needs to be some kind of external mechanism to hold the internal processes accountable to some standard.
Okay, let me answer that one first. We are busy now talking to independent people to set up our own ombudsman, where people can be able to go and report, where we can be held accountable by South Africans who are respected, who will then form part of that ombudsman. Number two, I'm not starting a new media platform. Africa News 24/7 has been there for 5 years. It's a continuation. It's a relaunch. And we have produced very, very good journalists, some of whom are editors of newspapers today, number one.
Are you able to give us a few examples?
The editor of the Daily News worked for Africa News 24/7. And by the way, the restructuring of EOH, the IT company, came about because of the investigative work that News 24/7 did. We exposed the rot that was happening between the executives and ESCOM and other entities. And by the way, Daily Maverick asked us for certain documents that we had on that story because they wanted to take a different angle. By the way, News 24 has taken our stories and they have published them, re-angled them without crediting us, where we were the only ones who published the stories as exclusive, who had the documents, but they would go on and publish. But because we are not fussy about people taking our stories, as long as they inform the public, we never wrote to them and tell them to take down the stories or that they are plagiarizing. So this has been done before to Africa News 24/7. We have written serious investigative stories that have brought about change in institutions. So we have scooped mainstream media many times, and we have never written an apology for the past 5 years.
I think
and I don't want to talk about those who have written apologies even in the front pages.
Let's not speak about other people who
we are a very credible publication.
Right. Let's not speak about those who aren't here to defend themselves. I hear what you're saying about News 24. Sadly, that's not really the nub of the question here. Plagiarism is a big deal, right? And again, not to overlabor the point, but it also eats away at credibility. You had mentioned before that some mistakes may have been made. William Burdish just cited specific examples where it seems that copy was directly lifted. Are you aware of these? What's your response to that? But more importantly, how are you ensuring stuff like that doesn't happen?
When I saw this tweet by this Chris, I spoke to the editor, and we are having a meeting today where we will be looking at all that, and obviously the editorial will then deal with it. But,
so plagiarism could have taken place?
Yes, as I said, we have assembled a team of fresh minds so that they can take this media platform forward without the burden of having worked for other media houses, so that they bring fresh ideas, understanding that we are a different voice, that we will not be following what everybody else follows, their narrative, that we need to inform South Africans truthfully, honestly, and we should not always be the first, because sometimes being just the first, if you are chasing to be the first, you sometimes not tell the truth because you want to be the first. So we want to be truthful, honest, and report in a responsible manner.
Yeah. William Bird, I'll give you the final bite of the cherry because of time. I mean, again, to the point you've made, it's always a good thing to have more voices included in the landscape, so to speak. I wonder how you think we can begin to bridge the gaps in what feels sometimes like quite a hostile environment. A lot of the posture from Kenny Kunene, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Kenny, is that their relaunch has been received with a lot of skepticism, and perhaps there are grounds for that. But perhaps a more progressive way forward is trying to ensure that we're all on the same page for the benefit of the public.
There's no grounds.
William?
There's no grounds.
On mute. So I think that, yes, you're right. It is a good thing that there's a new organization, but just compare the relaunch or rebranding as opposed to launch of new, as Mr. Kunene corrected me, to something like Newzroom Afrika. When Newzroom Afrika was there, they're there, their newsroom policies are there, they're adhering to the broadcaster's code of conduct as well as others. And what that does from the word go is it says, we're here, these are the principles that we agree to adhere to and abide by, and we're not seeing that from Africa News Global. There's nothing on their site that says this is our internal code of ethics and guidelines. So he's correct. Many news organizations have their own ombud process. The SABC has one, News 24 has one, the Mail and Guardian, I'm not sure whether they do. They used to. I think that they still do have their own internal ombud. So those are legitimate processes of themselves that start to build a level of credibility. But then you need to follow that up with saying, these are our newsroom policies, these are the principles, here's the details. If you have an issue, this is how you can start to get these complaints addressed. And I think that for saying that there's not going to be any interference in editorial, Mr. Kunene, with all due respect, when you asked him that question about plagiarism, he should have said, that's an issue for the editor-in-chief. We will ask them to investigate, but it's up to them to determine that. As we can't have anything to do with that. But if it's true, it is indeed a very serious allegation. Saying that News 24 copied us, so it's okay, and they didn't credit us, so we're just going to do it to them. I don't think that that's a fair and appropriate answer, especially in this day and age where people need to know where information comes from. If you want them to trust it and believe that it's credible, you have to tell them where it comes from. Otherwise, I think that you really are shooting yourself in the foot from the get-go, which appears in this instance to be the case.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, we are out of time. Very quickly, Kenny, I'm already in trouble, but I can see you're bursting at the seams to say something. In 10 seconds.
Yes. Let me just correct William there. I said the editorial is having a meeting today to deal with that matter. I was not justifying it. I said the editorial is dealing with it.
All right.
I don't get involved in editorial.
We're going to have to leave it there. It's an incredibly important thing, at the very least, for the media to also introspect. So, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for your indulgence as we unpack these different matters. William Bird is the Director for Media Monitoring Africa. Kenny Kunene, you know him as a businessman. He also happens to be with the Patriotic Alliance, but he's speaking to us now in his capacity as co-owner of Africa News Global. To both of you, once again, thanks very much indeed.